Okay. Okay, welcome everybody. We have been visited a couple weeks ago by Representative's colleague Betsy Fogel from the Democratic side of the aisle. Now we get a chance, of course, to hear from the Republican side of the aisle vis-a-vis Melanie Stinnett. So Representative Stinnett's going to take a couple minutes, or take however long she wants really, to talk about the nature of her job and how she got to where she is today. And then from there we'll have a more class-wide conversation. But first, round of applause for our guest speaker today. Thank you.
Well, as he said, my name is Melanie Stinnett. I am the state representative for District 133, which is up on the screen. It's the central and southwest side of Springfield. I don't know that I have I used to say it was a unique entrance into politics, but after learning a lot of legislator stories, I think we all have a unique introduction into politics, even if our lives sort of lean more political growing up, but my life did not. I had really zero interest in running for a political office prior to my decision to do so. I'm a speech pathologist by trade. I got my degrees at Missouri State and started working kind of throughout the continuum of care and healthcare back in 2010, and then in 2014 I took a giant leap of faith and opened a private practice in Springfield providing speech therapy for children with disabilities. And it was really during that experience owning my practice that I got involved in policy work and advocacy work. I would go up to the Capitol and I would advocate on behalf of bills that were beneficial for children with disabilities or small business and healthcare. And I realized very quickly that there were not a lot of people with strong healthcare knowledge in the Capitol. And after conversations with many people, that's really what led me to run for office, is just wanting to be a voice for a group of professions, and also on the disability side, a group of people who often their voice isn't present in the Capitol. And so I've really enjoyed that. I've been serving for 2 years, up for re-election this year. We have to run every 2 years, which is quite time consuming. It feels like you never stop running, but I've really enjoyed it, and it's been a good experience for me. So I'm anxious to hear your questions and be able to interact with you all. I know your questions are probably more engaging and thoughtful than me just standing talking to myself.
First question, what is your job like on a daily basis? Yeah. What are you doing when you clock in?
Sure, so every day is different. During the session from January through mid-May, we all serve on a various number of committees, and those committees meet at different times during the day, during the week. We're there Monday through Thursday. Typically, I go up kind of on Sunday evenings, get ready for my day on Monday mornings, but session doesn't really start until sometimes 2 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Mondays, so we've got a lot of time. And then I'm home by dinner time on Thursday. So between those times, it's a lot of meetings with constituents that come up to the Capitol, meeting with different interest groups that are interested in talking with us about legislation, having session on the floor, our committee meetings. It's really pretty fast paced. The days go by really quickly. Outside of that, we're home. I have a full-time job here in Springfield. I work at the Arc of the Ozarks as their Vice President of Therapy Services. So anytime I'm home, I'm doing my kind of real job, as I call it. And then meeting with constituents, kind of the same thing as far as meeting with people in the Capitol I do here at home. Go have tours of different businesses or nonprofits and talk to them about the issues that are facing them on the daily.
Ma'am, you identify as a Republican. Republican is the more conservative of the two major parties. Why that party? Why not some other party?
Yeah, I would say the main thing that lends me toward the Republican Party is the importance of limited government. And it, again, was an example of the reason that I ran. There were government regulations that were making it more challenging for me to be able to serve the children in our state the way that I thought was appropriate. And so, to me, when government gets involved, it gets pretty messy pretty quickly. And so my interest is making sure that government has a limited role. Where it's necessary, it is necessary, and we should hold government accountable. But where it isn't necessary, we should pull back the reins.
So on the podium next to you, there are a whole bunch of voter registration applications, and as you may, kind of fortuitous you're visiting us today. It's the very last day to register to vote.
Today is the last day.
Make a case for us. Why is this election important? Why should we register to vote?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that there is much more that you can do that would be more impactful than making sure your voice is heard. Being an advocate for individuals with disabilities that often don't have their voice heard, I can tell you that when there are sort of these barriers to different points of access, it becomes something that you really hold dear, right? So imagine yourself in a place where your voice didn't matter and you didn't have the opportunity to let that voice be heard and make a difference, and kind of let that sit in and let that be a catalyst for why you should let your voice be heard. When you are 20 years from now and you see the impact that things of the things that have happened in Missouri, you can say, you know, you were a part of that and you helped make the decisions to move those things either forward or hold them back.
So I will open up this conversation here before long, but for now, there's a couple major things on the ballot we should talk about.
Yeah.
First of those is Amendment 2 on legalizing sports gambling.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this amendment? We're starting to really see advertising for it ramped up. So what are your thoughts on this amendment?
Sure. On the surface, I don't really have any, personal issues with sports wagering and things like that. I know that Representative Fogelman had explained. Was this the same class she spoke with, or different?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. She spoke with a different section.
A different section.
Yeah.
But she spoke, I think, a little bit about kind of what that looks like in our state. There are many states around us that allow sports betting, so you can, go across the line to Kansas and you can vote on the Chiefs, or you can bet on the Chiefs, but we can't in the state of Missouri do that. And so personally, I don't have an issue with that. What I do have issue with is that it's a constitutional amendment. I really feel like those things are more meant for statutory change. Unfortunately, our legislature hasn't made significant movement on that. But I do have concern that if there were issues with the language, or we decided that the funding mechanism wasn't quite right or didn't do things the way that we would want them to be, we would have to go back to a vote of the people to change that, which is complex and challenging of its own right. So really, I don't have a problem with the sports wagering component, but the constitutional amendment component of it is a challenge for me.
The other major item on the ballot, there's several things on that. It's
There.
very busy.
It's 2 pages, front and back.
It's a very busy ballot. But maybe the biggest issue on the ballot, of course, is Amendment 3. It would be about lifting Missouri's abortion ban. I'm confused a little bit with the ballot language versus what's in the actual text of what would go in. Can you, first of all, what is it? Second of all, your thoughts on it?
Sure. So currently in the state of Missouri right now, we have an abortion statute that only allows for exceptions in the case of the life of the mother. There are people in our state who believe that that goes too far, and we're interested in making sure that that got changed. Unfortunately, I think that this ballot measure goes kind of the other direction. So the language talks about allowing abortion up to fetal viability, but then it has exceptions beyond that for the life of the mother, for rape and for incest, but also for mental health of the mother, and other language in there that is very vague and doesn't have clear definitions. I think when you read the ballot language, which many people won't. Many people will go into the ballot box and there will be a small summary. They'll read that summary and make their decision yes or no based on that. But if you read the full language of the bill, it is both very broad and very vague on several different pieces, and there aren't clear definitions. And so for that reason, I think it's concerning. Also, again, goes into our Constitution. So if we find that that language actually is harmful to women and to babies in our state, then it would be extremely difficult to reverse that and make any changes to it. So definitely have some significant concerns about that language.
So we'll open up the conversation here in a minute to anybody in the classroom. And once again, we've done this with you a half dozen times. You're just all comers, all questions. We'll welcome that as much as we can. However, I have 6 other classes, and they wrote in many questions as well. One of them was an online student, Shannon Noggle, who wrote on HB 2274. You voted yes to establish revisions to the corporate income taxes, which will decrease the corporate income tax to 0 in all tax years beginning after 2028. With decreasing the corporate income tax, what will happen to the state's budget And will the citizens' income taxes be increased to fill the deficit created by the elimination of corporate taxes?
So one of the things we talk about with corporate taxes, and you'll hear people on different sides of the aisle obviously have different opinions on this, but corporations don't pay taxes. Technically, they pay taxes, but they pass those costs down to us as consumers. And so, we're looking at making sure that the regulatory and the taxation environment for companies in the state of Missouri is a good one that allows industry and companies to come into Missouri, and that our consumers aren't paying higher costs because of those taxes. I don't think that the cost and the taxes for individuals would necessarily go up on that side of the question. I think that it's a whole tax package though when we're looking at how we want to adjust taxes, and we're really looking at trying to make sure, again, that as many of your dollars stay in your pocket as much as possible, but still maintaining those essential services at the state.
Riley Hutchins asks, I'm reading in her voice, considering ongoing budget constraints, this is kind of related, how do you propose to balance tax cuts with the need to fund essential services such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure? Can you discuss any potential reforms to the tax system that you believe would stimulate economic growth while maintaining fiscal responsibility?
So I think that some of the things that we've done over the past couple of years with keeping what we've called kind of a rainy day fund in the state of Missouri have been really important. As we see with inflation and other factors, some of our sales tax revenue and other revenues going down, we do have a pocket of money that can kind of take care of us during that time. But it is going to be important to take a look at tax policy across the board and make sure that we aren't cutting ourselves short in being able to provide those essential services, education, services to our disabled community and things like that. I'm not going to pretend that I am a professional tax specialist and determining kind of what all of that looks like. But I think that the more that we allow, again, you to keep as many of your hard-earned dollars as possible, then you're going to spend that money in the best way possible. And as long as we have policies around our sales tax that collects those in a smart way, then we should be able to maintain those things.
Zane Gray writes that you voted to support the Missouri Empowerment Scholarships Accounts Program. He asks, how would you guarantee accountability in private education?
So the accountability in private education comes from parents. If you don't enjoy and don't appreciate the education that your children are getting in private education, you don't keep your child in that school. And so that accountability really comes from the family, and I think that's the right place for the accountability to sit.
Joshua Sexton says, with you voting yes on the nuclear tax exemption and it being passed, do you believe there will be more nuclear power plants built in the coming years?
We still have some barriers to that statutorily, I believe, so there'll need to still be some work on that. I know there was another bill that we worked on passing that did not get passed last year. So there's still work to be done in that area, but I see some movement that direction.
So Daniel Price asks, what advice would you have for someone who wants to get started in a political career for a lifetime?
I would say that you should get internships in the Capitol, come and visit us in the Capitol, get involved with the political parties locally and kind of figure out what best fits your policy understandings, and just get involved. I work with the Young Republicans almost on a daily basis right now because it's campaign time and I get to know a lot of them. They go out door knocking with us, they help us do phone banking, they help us plan events and things like that. And so just getting to know elected officials in their capacity, both on the campaign side, but then also in the Capitol, I think would be a great way to get started.
All right, so Charity Choates writes, I saw that you were a member of the Subcommittee on Appropriations, Health, Mental Health, and Social Services. She asks, is there any bills you're working on about mental health?
It's not specific to mental health, but I will highlight the bill that I filed both years, that actually has been filed for many years prior to me joining the legislation, has to do with substance use and abuse. I actually also sit on the Substance Abuse Task Force. We know that there are many individuals with substance use issues that have other co-occurring mental health challenges. I filed a bill that would allow public health departments and other authorized places to offer syringe access programs. What that looks like is that someone would be able to exchange a needle for a clean needle. And the importance of the bill is actually not that component. While that is important and can decrease hepatitis C and other diseases, the importance of the legislation in my mind is actually that people who participate in syringe access programs are 4 to 5 times more likely to access treatment, which means that we have a 4 to 5 times more likely opportunity to help those individuals lift themselves out of that lifestyle. So while not, specifically directly related to mental health or mental health funding, I think that bill would be a good step in the right direction. Communities would be able to choose for themselves whether that was something that is necessary and needed in their community. So it's not a mandate that every county board or every public health department have one of those programs. But when I was knocking doors my first cycle, I walked on the north side of my district. There's a school and then kind of a windbreak planted area and an apartment complex. And then across the street there's a sweet little neighborhood with about 4 streets. And on a couple of those streets, the individuals that live in those neighborhoods were telling me that they routinely walk through that windbreak area and clean up needles so that the elementary school children don't have to walk past that. And I thought, well, this bill seems like something that in our community could potentially be a benefit if it decreases those needles out in our community.
I will open up the floor here, just a couple questions here. So anybody might have any questions, once again, feel free to raise your hand here momentarily. But first, let's do a couple more questions. As you could probably expect, lots of Trump questions this round. We have an election just a few weeks, what is it, like 3 weeks away?
Yeah.
Leah Zahoon asks, I know that you believe that Trump did a great job while he was president, but what about the fact that he spread classified information, and now that there are many lawsuits about his participation in corruption and bribery, can the maybe future president of the United States be president after this?
Yeah, I think he can. I think that, we have a choice this year for president at this point in time, 3 weeks out from the election, where we have, Donald Trump on one side and Kamala Harris on the other with their vice president picks. And it's my belief that Donald Trump's policies and the direction that he would go with those policies would be better for our country. I also believe that the people that he would put in positions in his cabinet and in other positions in the government would be a better fit to move our country forward.
Last question for me, for at least for now. Teen Chow asks, do you still strongly support the Second Amendment, despite gun violence, I'm reading in her language, despite gun violence is happening on a regular basis?
Sure, I do I support the Second Amendment. I think it's important that people in our community have the ability to defend themselves, and I think that some of the pieces that we hear talked about regarding gun control, when we're comparing ourselves to maybe what other countries do or things like that, they would be extremely challenging to implement in our country. Not to say that there aren't things that I think need to be observed and we need to make movement on the issue of gun violence. We have a task force here in the city of Springfield that's working on that topic, and I think some of the things that have come out of that task force have been really beneficial thoughts, and I hope to see them move forward with some of those ideas.
All right, allow me to open the floor. Any questions or thoughts for the representative?
Yeah.
You talked about the discrepancy in Amendment 3 between the ballot language and the actual bill language. What's the process that goes into determining ballot language for a complicated bill like that?
That's a great question. So to my understanding, and if I get anything a little incorrect, let me know.
Oh, that's generous of you to assume that.
But so the people who put together the language for the ballot initiative submit what they believe the ballot language should be, it goes through a process at the Secretary of State's office, and then that has a final approval process. So it is first determined, it's my understanding, by the people who propose the ballot language, but then approved by, and can be adjusted by the Secretary of State's office.
Other questions, other thoughts for
Yes,
Representative
sir.
Stinnett?
You said that you find Trump's policies to be a better fit. What policies specifically do you find like are better support the average American?
Yeah, I think his tax policies are a better fit for everyday Americans. I think that when, as I talked about at the state level, I think that when you look at some of the things that the other side is proposing from their presidential candidate, I'm not sure where we're supposed to get the money for the things that they're proposing. Again, policies that keep your tax dollars in your pocket are going to be best. So I think that's a really big one. Thanks. Yes.
Okay, so homelessness has been like on the rise.
Yeah.
Due to housing markets and everything being so expensive, what are your thoughts about how to decrease it?
I think that's a great question. I actually just sat on a housing panel recently, and one of the 4 areas that they talked about was homelessness prevention and helping in that area. I'm going to kind of veer off a little bit of your question, and I'm going to come back to it based on some of the experience I have with the disability community. And I talked about this during the housing panel. In the state of Missouri, and not just the state of Missouri, but overall in our country, we moved away from what we call institutionalization of individuals with disabilities and mental health concerns. And what our goal was in doing that was that we would integrate these individuals into the community. And our state's done that. We have home and community-based services where these individuals live in supported living environments and have opportunities to integrate into our communities. I was just talking with someone yesterday, and you know, I work for an organization here at home that helps those individuals have that supported living environment. But you wouldn't know, if you were out in the community and you just walked by a house, you wouldn't know that there's an individual in supported living there, which is really great, you know, fully integrated in our community. However, there are individuals who, because of their mental health or because of the level of their disability, even that is a challenge and a challenging situation. They may flee, they may, you know, leave because of different things, and so they may end up homeless. And so because we kind of did a complete 180, right? We went from institutionalization to absolutely none. There really aren't a lot of options in our state for those individuals that maybe need kind of a short-term rehabilitative opportunity. And I think that's really led to some increases in our homeless population. And my hope would be that we can take a look at that in the legislature and make some determinations on how to kind of let that pendulum swing. We don't want full institutionalization because that was really unhealthy. There were a lot of abuse and challenges with that. But if we let the pendulum swing just a little bit, we can maybe give some opportunities, like I said, for those short-term stays in a facility that's geared toward treatment and help to kind of rejuvenate that person and help them get to a better place. I think places in our community like Victory Mission do a really great job of that, of working through a process with an individual to help get them to a place where they can be independent in our community, and those are the types of things I would continue to support.
I'm going to interject with a question from Richard Browning. He says that based on your voting record, you seem to vote yes on nearly everything. He says, do you genuinely believe each of these bills is beneficial and deserves to be passed? Or is there another reason, such as the time-consuming nature of reading them all, or perhaps a tendency to follow the majority?
So, you know, in the past session, very little got to the floor. So, you know, there weren't a lot of opportunities, honestly, to vote yes or no on, you know, a great deal of things. I'd have to go back and look. I'm sure I voted no on a thing or two. In veto session, I voted no, or I voted actually not with the majority of my party on a veto override. So I certainly don't just always vote with my party. I really try and pride myself in reading all the bills, especially the bills that come through our committees. You know, that's our time to really be vetting the bills and looking at the language and making sure we feel like it's where it needs to be before it goes to the floor. So many of those I've spent, you know, hours looking at the language prior to them coming to the floor. We also have a lot of votes on the floor on amendments that aren't documented votes, so they're votes that we just say yes or no out loud, and it's not a documented vote, so there may be some of those where I voted no. But I take very seriously my responsibility to read those bills and really make an independent decision on whether I feel like those bills are going to be good for our communities or not.
What veto did you override?
So we didn't actually override it, but I voted for it. It was money for the ombudsman program for our nursing home residents.
I'm going to ask a question based off Richard's question. He says the time-consuming nature of reading all the bills.
Yeah.
We've had Stephanie Hine in here before, who works, or at least at the time, worked on the budget committee.
Oh,
And
yeah.
she said that if you stack the budget up in paper, it would be taller than her.
Mm-hmm.
You're human. You
Mhm.
can't read everything,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
So how do you vote knowing that you are literally unable to read everything? How is that possible?
Yeah. The budget is a totally separate conversation. You know, I think when we're talking about legislative bills that have been filed, are there times where you don't read every single word? Sure. But on the budget, I mean, it would be impossible to, I mean, even if you're on the full budget committee, to really read every single thing. One of the things, and I've already mentioned it several times, is the committee process. You know, you have to build a level of trust with other legislators that they're doing a good job of vetting information in those committees and bringing forth something that is a good product from those committees. So often I will go, so I'll give you an example. Utilities is not my area of expertise. You know, you asked a question about nuclear energy. When something regarding utilities comes up on the floor, I have a handful of people that I go talk to and say, hey, tell me kind of what this bill does and explain to me, you know, the good and the bad. And I have people that I trust that'll give me both sides, you know, that I'm not just looking for somebody to tell me the things that I want to hear. The other thing is they create summaries for all of the bills, and so there'll be a summary page that drafting creates that tells you the gist of the bill, so you can get a summary of it.
I actually did. I'm sorry. That was such an amusing question to me. There's another student that wrote named John Horvath, who did note that you voted no on the amends state industrial hemp regulations bill, and then he asked if you had any thoughts on hemp regulation. That's certainly not an area of your expertise. Hemp regulation.
No. I do think, you know, we passed some legislation, or let me back up. The constitutional amendment passed for recreational marijuana, and it doesn't allow the regulation of THC in some products, which is concerning to me. And so I think that prompted the conversation with hemp products. I think it is an important conversation. We've seen a significant increase in that sub-appropriations committee on health and mental health. We heard testimony from the departments of increased overdoses of children because of some of the access to these products. So it did prompt a conversation.
Joshua Sexton asked a question earlier, but he has a second one that I really liked. He says, with you voting yes on the bill to prohibit higher education from discriminating against religious students, he asked, do you believe it to be a problem before the bill was passed, or is it more nipping it in the bud?
Yeah, so I was actually on the committee that heard, I can't remember if that was the bill that came to the floor, but we heard a similar bill in committee if it wasn't. And we heard testimony that there were concerns for that. I do not recall if there were concerns present within our state or if those were present in other states, but I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think there's concern that it's happening currently, but also a little bit of let's make sure that this isn't occurring in our state.
Emily Thomas writes, I think only private schools should offer classes based on religion. Since you voted for schools to offer elective courses on the Bible, would this pertain to public non-religious schools? And do you think it's appropriate for a public school to offer classes on the Bible?
You had a class that asked me a similar question last time I was
did,
here. And I think that As long as it's an elective and it's a choice that person can make, then I have no problem with them offering. Obviously, regulatory-wise, that applies to just public schools. A lot of your private schools are already going to have electives or opportunities for that type of learning. But yeah, I think as long as they are elective options, I don't see a problem with that.
And I think we should probably mention the class would be educational and not evangelical.
Right.
I think. Okay.
Right.
Well, let me open the floor again.
Yeah.
Anybody that might have a question or any thoughts?
Yes, sir?
So I want to go back to the disability.
Yeah.
What types of people are classified as disabled?
That's a really good question. So there are two, I'm going to call them kind of different types of disabilities that we talk about from a legislative perspective. And really, the federal government has some different layers of this too. There's individuals who are born with a disability, say, they have cerebral palsy or Down syndrome or other diagnoses that qualify them as having a disability. There are people who acquire a disability, so they have a car accident in their 20s and they, for the rest of their lives are disabled. Those are two separate categories, really, and how you qualify for, services or things like that. So, yeah, to answer your question, those are kind of the two different types that I see kind of regulatory-wise, and there are a lot of different levels of how you qualify for different services and different programs. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll allow the floor to remain open.
Yes.
With the minimum wage going up to 15 and then being tied onto inflation, how would that affect our small business owners and pricing of merchandise in general?
I think that is a really significant concern. I was a small business owner, as I mentioned myself, for many years, and minimum wage is something that could cause a small business that doesn't have very significant margins to potentially go out of business or maybe turn more to use of AI or other options versus employing an individual. So I think that's a very valid question. I think that it would result in increased costs of goods and services, and for those reasons it could be a challenge for small businesses.
Dahlia Brand from another class asks, what's your opinion on standardized testing in education? And what do you think we could do to make education better for students?
One of the things I've learned since being in the legislature is that the way that we are testing students may not be the best option. I think when I was in school and taking all of those standardized testing, I remember, thinking to myself, this is so silly. Why do we have to do this? We have to have some level of understanding of growth in our students and their learning and their academics. But I think just kind of taking test year after test year to compare may not be the best way. We have some districts and even within Springfield, we have some schools that are, for different reasons, higher performing than others, and it might be more beneficial to look at analyzing the growth